Hello and welcome to Vision Denial. My name is Sam, and if you're new here, I usually watch every single playoff before Worlds begins. Yes, including that one. And it's Playins, baby. First day of Worlds. We'll have to be a little bit quieter. It's really early in the morning. Don't want to wake up anybody. And last night was long. Like, there's a lot of pauses. Really frustrating. But also some interesting stuff that happened. A lot of things about the meta that was expected and not expected. A lot of things about the matchups that were expected and not expected. Overall, I think it was a really interesting day. A lot of really solid games. And instead of just waiting, let's review them, shall we? Our first game of the day was Isurus Gaming versus Mad Lions. Honestly, there's a lot to be impressed by Isurus, as they found angles of engage and pockets of Vision Denial to really catch Mad Lions off. Mad Lions, on their part, felt like they started the game being a little too lax in the approach and were caught off guard when they were punished for their very lazy and overzealous moves. I honestly think that the too aggressive or too passive approach of Mad Lions is not a good sign for things to come. Their slow approach to ending the game and their lack of understanding of the limits means that other teams will take note and go where Isurus Gaming could not. What held them back was mostly a result of poor gold aggregation from Isurus Gaming, because they held solid tempo control in different moments, just not enough gold to keep it for very long. For me personally, Admut is my MVP for this game, just because of the sheer presence he applied across the board. You really can't believe how much presence he had. Second game of the day was Fnatic versus Evil Geniuses. Honestly, this game was fully decided once Evil Geniuses opted to not play towards their win condition after the first fumble. There's so much to be said about the way that Humanoid nullified Jojo Pune, making any potential play to the bot side even harder to execute. Fnatic found the time to individually outplay and survive the first 10 minutes and slowly began the sequence to suffocate resources on all angles: vision, turrets, camps, any given particular type of resource. I do think that the vision from both sides was fairly shallow and weak overall, but given how lane-focused that stage of the game was, I don't think it mattered as much. Evil Geniuses also plagued that there wasn't a plan B angle for their composition to work with, which is really bizarre because they definitely had options as a plan B. I grow concerned for Evil Geniuses for the games to follow, while Fnatic solidified what most people expected. They are so easily likely to make it to groups, especially given this would just solidify everything. My MVP of the game is Humanoid, for he nullified his opponent and controlled the river space with it. And I mean controlled all of the opponents, like everybody. Third game of the day was Loud versus Beyond Gaming. Loud was the more proactive team, but the execution just wasn't there. Mixed with issues relating to the laning phase differences, allowed Beyond Gaming to just coast on the success of the labor. Which is rather a shame, because Loud did play to the win conditions they needed early game, but without the execution it winds up just being mute. Beyond Gaming, for their part, just played comfort zone, leaning into strong flank angles, good side lane pressure, and while the vision game was not as strong as hoped, the Vision Denial was there to help enable the draft's ability to fight. I think that the inherent laning phase skill difference was the largest factor at play than execution, and it will be interesting to see how others adapt to Beyond Gaming, and how Loud adapt their drafts to future games. My MVP goes to Kino, who created the space necessary for these flank options to really pop off. Our fourth game of the day was Mad Lions versus Istanbul Wildcats, the two big cats of World Championships. Oh boy, was it dicey. The slow nature of the Mad Lions play almost cost them, as the Wildcats really understood how to prioritize strakes and create angles of engage. But the gold lead that Mad Lions had accrued early, and that the Wildcats did not play around proactively, made a huge difference overall. I do think it is unfortunate how Mad Lions kept losing control of the tempo of the game, as the Wildcats found really solid angles of attack for any plays that Mad Lions would throw at them. I don't think it is a good sign that I don't think it's a sign that Mad Lions is doomed, and more of a sign that Mad Lions needs to reevaluate their approach or their slow approach to the game. The Wildcats should decide to be more active early and play around Herald more often, or lose out similarly to how they lost games in their region, which is not a good position to be in 0-2. My MVP is Unforgiven, as he maximized uptime and damage against a squad that had a lot of backline access. Our fifth game of the day was Chiefs versus Fnatic. This was cleanly done, effortless, and rather expected. The inflated stats and performances out of Chiefs would have been expected, as just that, inflated from their region. While they did hold up a competitive angle during laning phase and some early neutral objectives, Fnatic allowed a lot of things to happen that were no longer possible once the mid-game rolled around. At that point, the vision started to get choked out, the wave management was much scarier, neutrals impossible to approach, and Fnatic just kept finding picks in some of the scariest ways. I don't think anyone should have expected Chiefs to win this matchup, but it's good to see how they approach the game, as there are signs of that dominance that other teams of this group won't be able to handle as easily as Fnatic did. My MVP is Humanoid again for this day, just from the sheer presence he alone gave. But honestly, that pentacle for upset, sweet. Our sixth game of the day is Detonation Focus Me versus Loud. I think this is an excellent showing on how Loud used neutral objectives and vision to take control of the games in CBLOL, and another example of how ballooned some of the expectations were for Detonation Focus Me. Now, Detonation Focus Me were slower on the roll, sloppier with vision, and no sense of where to attack their win conditions, while Loud knew where to go for their win conditions and continuously aimed higher and higher, never letting the tempo slow down really. They knew that slowing the game down at all would lead to them getting outskilled, and honestly, I'm a big fan of that particular approach. If they keep up a performance like this, I can see them going second or third seed out of Playins. My particular MVP here is Tinones, who found wild angles to start any fights or create pressure. Honestly, I don't think Detonation Focus Me expected this kind of performance out of them. Our seventh and penultimate game of the day was Saigon Buffaloes versus DenizBank Istanbul Wildcats. This is not a great look for the Buffaloes, but an even worse look for the Wildcats. This being an incredibly aggressive approach from the Wildcats, who saw the unorthodox picks and ran with the idea they could just bring, they could bring this particular draft far behind. But the Buffaloes was molded by the chaos, shaped by it. Especially from these kinds of games, and knew exactly how to collect advantages from them, even if you lose out early. Given the remaining games that the Wildcats have left to play, it does not look great, and they need to fix some of the aspects of their vision and map movements to even see their chances at a Playins, especially the ones that we saw here. The Buffaloes have a lot more to play, but this doesn't show the same kind of prowess that would lead me to think that they are a top 2 team out of this group. MVP for me was Hasmed, that just from the map pressure alone, making Wildcats second guess all of their moves. The final game of the day was DRX versus Royal Never Give Up. The most anticipated game of the day, I'm honestly surprised about when they decided to be aggressive and when they became patient from both sides. The slow pacing allowed both sides to scale in ways that they cared for, so it came down really to execution and proactivity. While the Royals had more proactive play, DRX ended up creating more opportunities with vision denial and neutral setups. The drafts also allowed for more flexibility in their approach, as having more engaged tools overall just grants stronger opportunities to catch people out for any team who was mispositioned. Royals here had a stronger early game approach, but didn't lean into it, creating a scenario where the early leads is left to the wayside with not much more that can be done. This wasn't as clean as I'd hoped for a game, but it at least shows that DRX can show up and adapt in a way that suits their style, while the Royals are stuck to incredible vision but didn't do anything with it that would be considered notable. My MVP for the match is Zeka, who operated around the vision play super well. Overall, my thoughts on the day are a little bit scattered. It's mostly just still day one, but because Playins has so few but so many games, like there are more games in Playins, but the teams have fewer games to really respond and make a case for themselves to get two groups, that a lot of the things that we view here have to be put in with a bit of scrutiny. It is important they get every single win, but how they get the wins or how they lose can be an equal indicator when it comes to the best of 5 portion. Like, just alone from the Wildcats, if they win at least 2 of the games somehow, it still doesn't tell me that their best of 5 prospects are going to go great. While as for Mad Lions, who has had a lot of success within their group so far, those 2 wins are against teams that people expected them to win, and it'll really matter in the next 3 games to come, because the wins they had were not so great. The other thing is mostly regarding champions. A lot of the top champions that we see, Aatrox, Kalista, Sejuani, Silas, Talia, Leona, are like expected picks from the meta. Things that we had seen across the playoffs of every single region. It's mostly the lack of stuff that hasn't been coming through. The Zeri, the Sivir, the Wukongs, things that nerfed. But from the expectations of how Riot Games phrased their patching, they wanted to have the least amount of changes to the meta, which tells me a whole lot when the bulk of the meta is just gone, right? But it is, again, day one. We don't know if anybody's going to pull up a Lucian Nami. From the behaviors here, it doesn't seem like it, but we don't know. Zeri and Sivir could come back with a different kind of enchanter, but the overall reduction of impact from enchanters leaves things a little bit dicey regarding the bot lane meta. Whilst the top side of map, outside of a Hecarim resurgence, seems fairly standard. We're still getting Victors, we're still getting Azirs, Orns, Trundles, Jaxes, Aatrox especially. So, like, I don't think much of the meta was changed. And the parts that were, I think, negatively impacted a good section of the map. It's harder to actually create a bot lane proactive setup in a situation where, like, a lot of teams, their success going into Worlds was like that. So I'm going to be really interested in the ways that the teams, like the team that first comes to mind is Evil Geniuses, but also like Royal Never Give Up. Those teams really excel on bot lane management and making sure that both sides of the map are incredibly fed enough to be able to split up their opponents. So it'll be mostly down to, I want to see how teams are continuously adjusting towards leaving the bot lane as part of their meta focus. But at least those are my thoughts just from day one. I want to hear what you guys have to think in the comments down below. Like, are things moving as expected from patch notes? Are there still some surprises from what you have? How about the team matchups? Are things going along as expected? Did you expect that Loud would win against Detonation Focus Me? I had a bit of a feeling that would be the case, but that's because DFM has wishy-washy expectations. Any and every thought in the comments down below I would love to hear. If you like this kind of content, leave a like and subscribe. Honestly, it would mean it means a lot to me for everybody who watches. And we'll see you on the next one.